we did not speak for long, so we've got some time for the next session to start. So we might leave around 5 minutes, just 5 minutes break before we start the next session. Okay, thank you.
Morning, everyone. I just have to say once more, thank you for being here. We are going to start with the first panel of the conference, and I have to welcome two wonderful speakers. Our first speaker will be Dr. Miriam Borham-Puyal, and then we will have Elizabeth Renshaw. I'm going to introduce Dr. Miriam Borham. So I'm going to read the bio. She's the senior lecturer in the English department of the University of Salamanca. She has authored pieces on women writers from the 17th to the 21st century. She's also the author of Quijotes con Enaguas, an editor of a volume on the writings on Frankenstein. And her most recent book is Contemporary Rewritings of England Women, Echoes of the Past, published by Routledge, which explores the liminal figures of the female vampire, detective, quixote, and prostitute in past and present popular narratives. And I would like to add that she's a wonderful friend and person overall. So, Miriam, whenever you're ready, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Thank you to the organizers for having me here. As everybody knows, I do 18th century novels, so I'm infiltrated here. But I always learn so much. It's wonderful to be here with, wonderful organizers and friends and wonderful panelists. So hopefully I won't bore you with my insights into theatre. So the title is Reclaiming the Silenced Woman in Joanna Baillie's The Bride. She was compared to Shakespeare by Walter Scott and strongly admired by Lord Byron as one of the few women who could actually write tragedy, as we will see later. Joanna Baillie was an extremely popular playwright and also an acute theatre critic. In fact, she developed in the introduction to her grand dramatic scheme, Plays on the Passions, published between 1798 and 1812, an analysis of the theatre of her time, together with her notion of sympathetic curiosity and psychological exploration. In this dramatic experiment, Baillie attempted a comedy and a tragedy on each passion, displaying, as Judith Bailey has claimed, not only a strong Shakespearean influence, but also displaying the advances in the field of neuropsychology achieved, among others, by her own brother Matthew, who was a reputed doctor. Her plays become study cases of obsession and psychosis, of what might destroy a man or a woman from within. In this sense, her notion of sympathetic curiosity could serve audiences to identify and amend their mistakes by focusing on social and psychological exploration, in her own words, trying to avoid trickery and artifice that she saw as a flaw in contemporary drama. Baillie herself proclaimed the social and moral role playwrights should hold, reaching where historians could not, and educating their audiences. Maybe we should remind vice chancellors about this when they want to close down drama departments. And she also vindicated her own authority as literary creator in a genre traditionally dominated by men. Writing on Elizabeth Inchbald's amazing happiness recorded in her journal for having her play performed, but not only that, but her salary raised. Ellen Donkin summarizes what it meant for these female playwrights in the late 19th century to, in her own words, claim a subject position. Women wanted, continue to want. In the case of these women playwrights, they wanted money, and they wanted to see characters they had created speaking dialogue that they had written. They wanted to watch audience members rapt, weeping, convulsed with laughter, or thundering their applause. They wanted to be noticed, to be counted among the people who are taken seriously in the world as writers and thinkers and shapers of human action. They wanted power, agency, self-respect, historical consequence. They wanted to earn a living. While we have long dismissed the accusation of amateurism levelled against women writers in the long 19th century, it is still worth highlighting the conditions under which playwrights had to fight for these basic professional landmarks. Donkin goes then to record the resistance and male anxiety over women not being the thing wanted or not wanted, and instead doing the wanting, which implicitly called into question the codes of feminine conduct and by extensions the iniquities of an economic system which had depended upon those codes to procreate itself. End of quote. In Donkin's opinion, these critics were responding to the, and I quote, possibility of a woman speaking for herself without the grave fear of slander or censure, exerting control over the way she was represented, a subject rather than an object in culture, end of quote. Micheline Wander expands on this change and the fear it triggers, and this is important when we try to understand Baillie, as we will see. The playwright is controlling, quite literally, the voices of others. She's providing words, emotions, and an imaginative structure for others to inhabit and create anew on stage. A playwright, in this theoretical sense, thus makes other people speak and act, an act of public responsibility and control, which is very rare indeed for women in other parts of society. No wonder then that even the woman playwright with the mildest messages is bound to be seen as an anomaly, if not an actual threat. Who knows what she will say once she gives voice? Who knows what she will tell other people to say and do? And it is precisely this extraordinary range of potential voice and subject matter which makes the advent of women writers in theatre both so necessary and so exciting. End of quote. Baillie, as a reputed and successful playwright who gave voice to women, indeed can be understood within the debate on women's alleged appropriation of the stage, as well as the criticisms she received for her unsexed writing. Enter Byron. Having written tragedy, Byron joked about how she must have borrowed testicles to do so, and compared her to historical viragos, the only kind of women who could write tragedy because they had lived enough. While other women writers praised her courage in publishing her drama, Appiozzi called her brave Joanna for opening the way for other women. Moreover, Baillie complicates female characters on stage by working with stereotypes, the wise matron, the sentimental mother, the beautiful object of desire, as we have in this play, yet also exposing the social forces at play that reinforce those types, and also exposing the limitations of the men around them. To add to this ongoing debate and fight against Baillie's still relative obscurity in Spain, I wish to discuss a little-known play, The Bride, published in 1828, as a significant illustration of Baillie's comment on women's silencing, invisibility, commodification, and identification with the object to be consumed in the context of British Orientalism. In addition, this paper will highlight the need to recover Baillie as one of the key voices and pens of her time, who also upheld the notion that the personal is political, the domestic is political, and vindicated women's visibility and freedom. As is common with Baillie, the storyline of the play is relatively simple. The king Rosinga and his brother-in-law Samakun happen to see a beautiful woman at the exact moment her veil slips, and both fall in love with her. Rosinga decides to make her his second wife, but Samakun kidnaps her to be married. Rosinga captures them and condemns him to death. His wife, his first wife, Artina, intercedes for her brother and tries to help him flee, for which she is also sentenced to die. A Spanish doctor, Juan de Carrera, and Spaniards are the good ones in this play for once, seeks to convince the king to exert Christian compassion and mercy, which results in a discussion on the hypocrisy of Western colonizers. Finally, when Samar, Rosinga's son, offers himself in sacrifice with his mother, the king reconsiders, forgives them, and even allows the bride and Samakun's wedding. While the play does indeed follow Baillie's dramatic theory by focusing on complex relationship among characters and the inner process experimented by Rosinga, this work is unique in her production for a series of paradoxes on which it is constructed. First and foremost is the dual audience Baillie has in mind. Her preface states that it is destined to be consumed by the Zingalese in translation, yet also to be popular enough in Britain so that money might be raised for our translations. This leads to the cultural appropriation that Baillie performs. It is a displaced play set in Ceylon, the current Sri Lanka, translated into their language, and whose implied readers or theatregoers are the Zingalese. However, Baillie employs a set of sources and conventions far from the reality of Ceylon, and as Macmillan and Robbins have attested, displays a rather Anglo-centric approach to the foreign culture. Probably to engage the sympathetic curiosity of the British audience. Nevertheless, this foreign distance or detachment complicates the sympathy we are expected to develop towards the character, although the king is presented as a superior man in his road to self-discovery and self-control, overcoming his passion and showing mercy once he assimilates the Christian values. However, as Colin claims, this outsiderness or adoption of the outsider's vantage point is also a mean by which Baillie can denounce the abuses of colonization and the hypocrisy of British so-called Christians, even presenting the more positive example of faith in a Spaniard, the Dr. Juan de Creda. This also follows in her attempt to educate the British readers by presenting them with their own shortcomings. Again, the idea of theatre as an education place, as a school. Yet the more problematic sympathy is the one we're meant to experience towards the titular bride, who remains silent and detached from the audience. Racialized women appear in the play as doubly displaced in the condition as female and foreign, not only isolated from other characters, trapped in the home, covered by the veil, but also detached from the public sphere and also from the implied readers and audience. On the one hand, the reading of the bride as unreachable and mysterious responds to the identification of the Oriental exotic subject as eminently female. The fact that she is hidden under her veil and later revealed as indescribably beautiful, with no reference to her personality or any value beyond her personal worth, and that she is passed from one man to another, emphasizes this association between women and Eastern commodities that is conspicuously present in the literary production of the long 18th and 19th century. In fact, precisely because of this recurrent conflation of the female and the Oriental, the play provides its decolonial subtext. The situation of the bride, desired but silenced, seized unwillingly and passed from man to man to man, echoes the own situation of Ceylon in this colonial period. Ceylon had passed from the Portuguese to the Dutch in 1656, and then to the British in 1796, and it would not gain its independence until 1948. At the time in which the play was written, there was a growing interest to represent this territory in fiction and non-fiction alike. And the bride is fought over by several suitors, finally marrying whom apparently loves her better, but with little agency on her part, which makes the reader wonder if Britain is presented then as the more desirable yet unchosen partner for Ceylon. Baillie's representation of Ceylon, its inhabitants, costumes, and position as a subjugated country is then complicated both by her colonialist perspective, with her condemnation of what she sees as savages, backwards honor revenge, and its use of women, but also by her rewriting them within a Western literary tradition in terms of characterization and final values, which appear surprisingly similar when it comes to the treatment of women. With echoes of Afra Ben's well-researched representation of Imorinda in the Rurico, published in 1688, a comparison that I believe has not yet been made and that I am still in the first stages of writing. The nature of the bride as a commodified woman, both in her own culture and in the colonizers, deserves scholarly attention as a manifestation of the universal and endemic subjugation of women. Thus, Baillie's bride enables the author to put a mirror to her own society and its treatment of women. In a long literary tradition, well illustrated by the likes of Alexander Pope or Jonathan Swift, women's association with beautiful and delicate objects connects with a sexual reading as commodities for consumption. Here, both Razinga and Salma Kuhn wish to own her, to take control of her body, while the audience consumes her as a silent character devoid of agency, as the trigger for the action of men. Interestingly, this role played by the bride as motivation or reward also recalls the long tradition of the epic or the heroic romance, where women were relegated to that particular role. In her brief intervention, the bride regrets the blood spilled for her. And we could consider her then almost like an oriental Helen of Troy. Wars were started because of her beauty. Not only that, but the name bride refers to the fact that in these Western narratives, the happy conclusion for the hero's object of desire was precisely becoming one. It was either become a bride or die. So, by depersonalizing her character and referring only to her role, to the role that has been assigned within her own culture, but also within a wider literary tradition, Baillie calls attention to this commodification of women's merely objects in the marriage market or even on stage, which certainly falls close to the British 19th century home. I would suggest again that the play's displacement enables Baillie to present her comment on women's immobility and invisibility as something foreign, othered from the British, yet also significantly similar to the values they uphold regarding gender roles, subtly constructing a bidirectional critique. A similar approach would help analyze another important woman, Razinga's unhappy wife, Artina, a character largely forgotten by the few critics that have studied this work. Artina is defined by her relationships with the men in the play, husband, brother, son. With regards to her husband and son, Artina is allowed a very conventional and sentimental role to play. The rejected first wife who must beg for mercy, the mother who is redeemed and saved by her son. Yet her one moment of subversion comes as defender of her brother. She doesn't go gently into the dark night. She doesn't want to be a second wife, and she wants to save her brother. Thank you. She reclaims agency by plotting their escape in what is a huge act of defiance to her husband and patriarchal ruler. She is accordingly punished for her rebellion, condemned to die, and hence her example serving to instill silence and submission. If there had not been a Christocentric figure of redemption in Samar, or if Razinga had not assimilated the Christian value of forgiveness and mercy, Artina might not have been spared. While Baillie seems to positively compare Britain and Ceylon in this case, her staging of women's roles still proves more pessimistic than coeval productions, in which marriage concludes the adventures of and dangers for women, or where the moment of courtship is presented as a period of agency for women, a liminal phase between daughter and wife, between the need to enter the public sphere and be visible and the invisibility of the home. In this play, courtship is depicted merely as a transaction between men who covet and attempt to possess women, legally or illegally, and where wives are mere possessions to use and then outgrow. Baillie indeed offers no romantic colouring despite her romanticized setting. This is in tune with what we know of her own rejection of marriage and a conventional life, in which her autonomy and agency would need to be surrendered to her husband, rather achieving great success and wealth on her own, supporting herself, her sister. She was the breadwinner in her family. Baillie's agency comes through the aforementioned claiming of the stage and her own voice. As Ross Ballister has stated about other narratives in which women writers present subdued female characters, the latter stand as surrogate to the subversive author. The story of the female protagonist is very different to that of a female author. The female protagonist must seek shelter from the risk attendant on public exposure of her body and her attempts to speak her desire and autonomy publicly. Countless novels by women entail a heroine's learning, offer at an extreme emotional physical cost the limits of her freedom in order to prepare her to marry an older, worldly, judgmental, and authoritarian man. By contrast, her author evades the need for a male protector precisely because the novel allows her to enter a form of authoritative discourse without the risk of physical display of her own proper body. The heroine stands as surrogate, end of quote. In this sense, the bride's relative silence is also significant. She is not only absent for most of the play, when she's on stage only once, she delivers a total of 7 short pieces of speech in one scene, which again stresses her submission and lack of agency, or even, as Robbins claims, her limited role in theatre. If that is the case, Baillie would be once again validating her role as creator and theorist of the genre, subtly commenting on women's still inadequate representation, something which she attempts to correct in other plays. Moreover, Robbins contends that Baillie is precisely using her muted character to address the situation of romantic women, and romantic women writers in particular, which would fall within the act of surrogacy described by Ballister. However, it is also important to note the bride's transition in her brief appearance. In her first lines, she cites her father's authority and her lack of agency. And you have it on screen. What can I say? I was the destined bride of great Razinga. My father told me so. Or my choice, a modest virgin hath no choice. She also insists on remaining covered by her veil, although later it falls and she displays her beauty once again. Nevertheless, when pressed by Summer Kuhn to express her own desires, first her body and then her words betray that she wishes to stay with him, telling her attendants that, "Here I shall have no divided pleasure." Recalling Donkin's and Wander's description of the fear of the desiring woman and the woman with a voice, the bride is then silenced for the rest of the play, and her fate decided again by men without her intervention. What little we heard from the bride might have been too dangerous to be continued. In conclusion, Baillie offers a subtle comment on women's commodification and sexualization, as well as on the requirement for them to be silent and invisible when male authority is imposed. Her bride is doubly subaltern as a woman, an orientalized subject consumed by men and spectators who only get to enjoy her beauty. While Artina is more overtly a character destined to awaken the conscience of the locals and probably to provide a comfortable sense of moral superiority in British readers, both Artina and the bride still confront Western audiences with their consumption of these subjugated and silenced women. Baillie's play also reflects the context in which she wrote. I would maybe go as far as to suggest that Baillie, as a Scottish female playwright, is a doubly displaced from the center of the stage panorama of the time. Experts here might be able to delve more into that. While admired as a rarity, as seen as Byron's praise, she's also one of those women playwrights who would be consigned to silence on a very limited production, rare conventions to be followed and never broken, as we saw with tragedy, the idea that women could not write tragedy. Finally, to support these claims, it is essential to study this production within Baillie's wider corpus, in which strong, wise, and very visible women take the center stage and help her challenge those conventions off and on the stage. Thank you very much.